Hi. Okay, today I'm going to talk a little bit about why we repeat things unconsciously in relationships. So, a lot of times we find ourselves replaying or re-experiencing relationship patterns that consciously we say we don't like, right? Maybe we get attracted to a partner who has qualities that um, remind us of someone from our past that were difficult, right? Maybe you had a needy mother and now you have a very needy partner. Or maybe you had an emotionally unavailable or withdrawn parent, and now you have a partner who is also very emotionally unavailable and withdrawn. Maybe you grew up with someone who was very angry, and now you have an angry partner, someone who is passive aggressive. You have a passive aggressive partner or boss, or maybe one of your children behaves in ways that remind you of something from the past. And so a lot of times we find ourselves replaying past experiences in relationships or re-experiencing them without really wanting to, right? Consciously, we say we don't want that to happen, but unconsciously, somehow we find ourselves in these situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this happens or my theories about why it happens, and maybe a little bit about how it happens. So part of how this happens is that all of us are wired on a brain level to seek out things that are familiar. And a lot of times when we notice things that are familiar, we're using right brain experiences or intuition or nonverbal cues. There are signals that tell our brains that we're approaching a situation that is predictable to us or familiar in some way, even if we're not logically aware of that or we haven't consciously spelled that out for ourselves. So a lot of times we end up getting attracted to something in another person or another situation that reminds us of something from the past or feels familiar in a certain way. And that thing might be negative, and it could even be something that we tell ourselves we wouldn't want in our lives, but we end up, our brains in some way sense that there's something similar or familiar or that we associate with something from our past, and we end up being attracted to that situation, at least unconsciously. Part of why we get attracted unconsciously to situations that are painful, but that we experienced in the past is because we want to master them, right? So there's always this feeling of wanting to be in a situation that didn't end well in the past and wanting to believe that there's something we could do, or if only we play out differently, this time it will be different. It's a way of trying to repair something for ourselves internally, something that didn't work out well in the past. We want to actually have it go well in the present. And so we'll seek out a relationship pattern. Let's say if your mother was very rejecting, right? Maybe you find a rejecting partner and you try to get that rejecting partner to love you, and that will make you feel like the pain of having been rejected in the past is reversed in some way, or it will make you feel like maybe it was my fault in the past. If only I had tried harder or done something different, I could have gotten that love that I was looking for, or I wouldn't have been rejected. Sometimes we also are attracted to what's familiar just because it's predictable for us and we feel like we know the rules, right? So if someone was rejecting towards us, then we know in our minds that the way to protect ourselves from that is to maybe shut them out or not confide about ourselves, not confide in them about ourselves. Um, or to criticize ourselves first, and then they won't criticize us, once we put ourselves down, something like that, right? We know the rules in a way, or we know the script for how to handle or how to behave in that type of situation, how to maintain the attachment along those sets of rules. And even if it's painful or we're having to protect ourselves or the rules are difficult for us of that type of interaction, at least we understand it. At least we know it. It doesn't feel like something new that we're going to approach. And a lot of times what we're afraid of is something different, something new, something that's novel and unfamiliar to us, even if that thing would be better. A lot of times we even unconsciously take our current relationships and almost create like a self-fulfilling prophecy where we almost provoke the other person into playing out whatever we're used to, right? So we might push someone's buttons until they become rejecting. Or if we grew up with a needy parent, we might withdraw from our partner until they start to feel very needy with us and they become like the needy person. Or maybe I act passive aggressive And then my partner becomes angry, like my father was angry, just for example, right? I'm throwing out different possibilities of ways in which we might even play a part in evoking in other people reactions that we say we don't want, we think we don't want. On some level, we don't want them. They are painful to us. It's not that we're masochistic or we want to be hurt. It's that we want to believe that we could control those situations or repair them or reverse them, or just that we know how to deal with them because we're so used to them. And that's why a lot of times when we've experienced traumas, we find ourselves going back into traumatic situations. Um, Sometimes things that are very painful, we repeat them in order not to think about them. It's almost like we're so busy surviving them and being in them over and over again and having to use actions that are like a little bit automatic to protect ourselves, that we don't have to think about what happened in the past and grieve it. It's a way of like keeping something from the past alive in the present so we don't actually have to mourn what we didn't get or what went wrong. And a lot of these things, a lot of our fear of newness or novelty or something being different than we're used to, and a lot of our um, difficulty letting something go has to do with not wanting to grieve or be sad about leaving something behind. So when we do work on ourselves to try to change a dynamic in a relationship, whether it's we might reenact something with our own children, right? Where maybe um, we have a very angry child and we are afraid of anger from our own childhood or something like that. And so we find ourselves reacting with fear to that child, for example. Or one of our children seems very fragile, and we thought of ourselves as very fragile when we were younger and as needy and helpless. And so we're afraid to push that child to be independent or set limits with that child, or we get, kind of pulled into seeing that child as needing us to be overprotective, right? There's different ways that we can reenact relationship scripts with our children, with partners, with authority figures like a boss or a therapist. Um, that sometimes we consciously want to move away from that, but we're really afraid to do something new and to leave the past in the past and to leave things behind. And so when we try to change those dynamics and start responding in a different way based on a new context, a new set of circumstances, even similar behaviors can happen in totally different situation or context, right? So your child being angry at you is very different than your scary parent being angry at you when you're a little kid, for example, but we might react as if it's the same type of situation. So when we start to look at a new situation as something actually new, right? Where our partner is our partner, not our mother or our father or reminds us of our past self, where our child is our child and not just some version of how we were as kids or something like that. There's often a grief process. Even when we leave something negative behind, there is a void that happens. And sometimes the pull to kind of like go back into the familiar or do what we're used to doing or do the same dance is very, very strong. And we have to like really consciously help ourselves step out of that and really reevaluate the situation for what it is in the present. Look at different aspects of the current situation that might be a little bit different, right? Um, if you get upset at your child, it might feel very different to them than it felt to you when you were growing up. If your partner is upset with you, that might remind you of other times in the past as a child, maybe if people were upset with you and it was so scary, but now you're an adult and you can speak up and you have a voice and you're not helpless. So we kind of want to look at what's different in the current context from the past, even when the repetition or the desire to repeat is unconsciously activated, and to try to consciously change our behaviors, avoid that pull, and do the grief work of letting go of something that's no longer serving us.